Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Robin Dreek. I am the founder and CEO of People Formula, a leadership and communication strategies company, as well as the retired head of the FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program, where my job for over 21 years was recruiting spies. Judy, welcome today. We have Judy Ryan on my podcast, and she's the CEO of Lifework Systems, a culture transformation company, and we're going to really dive deeper on that. And I got to tell you, she has resources abound. I will include them all in the show notes at the end. And also listen to the very end for a very special opportunity as well. One of the things I really want to draw you to as well in these resources I'm going to put a link to is she has over 220 articles. And I started perusing some of these articles. They are really, really good, really, really rich. We're only going to be able to touch the surface today, but I got a sneaky suspicion I'm going to have Judy on many more times in the future. So with that, Judy, welcome. And as a really quick kickoff, you're the CEO of a culture transformation company. If you could tell us a little bit about your journey and how this basically became your life's passion.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Robin. And I'm enjoying getting to know you. So I'm looking forward to spending that time with you. And
Likewise.
I feel very fortunate that I came upon my passion pretty early in my life, my early 20s. And it was because I stumbled upon a psychology model that began to really do a lot to help me personally, because all of us are raised up in a society that has some conditioning that's not so great. And to untangle that, I found this particular model that I just fell in love with. And I haven't really lost my passion for it in close to 35, 40 years, something like that, which makes me sound pretty old, but it's been really great. I first applied it to families and parenting, and I was a parent educator. And then I started to see the application of it in any setting, and really had a calling to do this work full time in the late 90s, and then formed my own company, did it under another umbrella, another company for about 4 years. And then I started my own company 20 years ago. So we're in our 20th year.
Wow. Big congrats on that too.
Thank you. Thank you. We focus a lot on, how do you make your organization work? How do you make the world work? But a lot of times we really struggle to understand about what makes a human being work and really expand into the potential that's possible. So a lot of times we see people with high potential, but we don't necessarily know how they got there and why they seem like more of an exception than the rule. And so our work is really around how do you understand the conditions and conversations that people need to really expand into their greatest potential. And that's what I love to see. I love to see it coming to life in people. I love to see them overcoming the barriers that they've had, maybe sometimes their whole life. And I just think a lot of people don't necessarily have that information and they suffer unnecessarily. So that's a pretty long answer, but that's how I got here.
And it's a perfect answer, or actually the simple truths that people miss and that they don't understand for your personal success, both mentally, psychologically, spiritually, all these things is when you become a resource for the success of others and you become a servant leader in whatever capacity you see fit for that. It is the greatest thing you can do, not just for the other person, but really yourself. We are genetically and biologically coded to do these things. So when we're being of service to others, which is servant leadership, which is creating that healthy culture you talk about, it does such amazing things for us personally. I mean, my entire life, when I started recruiting spies, you're thinking, oh, it's all about manipulation and taking advantage of people and making it all about you. No, it's actually figuring out what their pain points are and being a source for them to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve for them and their families. But I digress into that.
No, I love it that you talked about servant leadership, but I would say that I always have this little message in my head that says servant leadership is for everyone. No matter what your title, no matter what your age, no matter what your role. I mean, I think I mentioned you before that when I was raising my 5 children, by the time they were 5 years old, they knew how to run a family meeting. And that was because they needed to know the joy and the fulfillment of being part of the contribution.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of
5 children. I'm sorry, 5 children. You've been a CEO a very long time with a lot of challenges.
That's for sure. That's the biggest challenge as a CEO is managing children. But, it was important to me that they learn to consider what their power does to other people. Like that's what we call social interest. What are the consequences that they can cause other people and that they do cause other people so that they're responsible with their power? So I love servant leadership, but sometimes it almost has this notion in my, most people think of it as the top titled leaders serving the underlings in a way. I believe it's everyone realizing the joy of contribution to one another. And maybe you feel that way too.
Absolutely. That joy of contribution to one another. What a great soundbite that is. And you'll probably see it in the social media postings I do, because I'm with you. Leadership is not about title and position. It's about being of service to others. And everyone is a leader. In the Marine Corps, we always said, if you have two Marines together, that's one's a leader, one's a follower, and they then alternate back and forth. Because again, and you hit that keyword power. Matter of fact, we're going down rabbit holes already off my script of the things I was going to ask. But that's such an important point, is power. It's, Jocko talks about an extreme ownership and the dichotomy of leadership, all these dichotomies. And I used to believe that leadership was a continuum scale. Either you're really good at it, you're really bad at it. And we spend our lives on this scale trying to move up towards great leadership. But in reality, what I discovered was it's a dichotomy of power and leadership, because power, as you're so defining here, is about self. And leadership is about others, and it's learning how to let go of the self and be about others. And people get afraid of doing this because of our insecurities and because we think we're going to get walked on or trampled on, and it's anything but the truth. Because in all honesty, a leader is the one setting the goals and objectives and has a plan to move forward to get there. And when you make it about others on that path, that's what servant leadership is. And so that's why I absolutely love what you do and the things you're bringing up. So I think it's a good segue so I can get to my first question. And it's something that we've talked about. And again, we can dive so deep on so many of these things. But what is a healthy workplace culture, and how does trust fit into one?
Okay, both good parts. I see those almost as two parts. So I'll start with the first one. What is a good, healthy culture? I look at the word culture and I think about like the word parenting, that if you had a room full of parents and you asked all of them, what is healthy parenting? They might have very widely differing ideas about what that is. So in our world, a healthy culture is one where there is the minimal or elimination of the power structures of hierarchy. That does not mean that there aren't certain authorities in positions of, responsibility, but in terms of the dynamics of a lot of the decision making and the power that is used within an organization, it's the goal is to have as much shared power as possible. And I think what it requires is a leader with a healthy ego. And I say healthy ego because ego always is thought of as a negative thing. But when you have a healthy ego, you're not driven to prove anything.
Right.
You're not driven to hold on to your identity. You're actually in a place where you can create other leaders. And you want other people to become leaders at all the different levels. And that's what we talk about. Ours is called a responsibility-based culture. It's a culture that's based on purpose and core values, and that comes before profit. So people and purpose before profit ensures more profit. And a lot of people don't see that. They say, no, profit's number one, and it's my bottom line. And they miss the point, because when you make your people and your purpose priority, then your profit follows. And so it's shared power, it's purpose and value driven. It's an organization of learning and supporting and mentoring so that people are able to learn how to be inductive reasoners, and they're able to solve problems without having to be told what to do. The old culture was just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Right. The new culture is you better know how to make decisions on the fly and see the opportunity and where you need to step in and lead something and when you need to step back. And most people haven't even been given the information or the experience to do that. And it's also a model where there's a holistic view of people, where you get to be the same person at work as you are in your personal life.
Yes, congruence.
And gosh, not having that congruence is so stressful to people.
Absolutely, because you're being someone that you aren't. And, that kind of mental juggling is extremely stressful. It's really interesting too, these concepts you're bringing up of basically decentralized command is what you're saying.
Yes.
It's all over the place. And yet a lot of people, because they are insecure, are a little afraid to let go of that command. And I know you've worked with so many companies and you have so many examples of this, but I'm going to tell you, I recently read a book that a client put me onto because they wanted to chat about this during one of our sessions. And I think the biggest company right now that people can reflect on and think about that does exactly what you're talking about is Netflix. There's a book out there that they wrote called No Rules Rules. Basically, they got rid of all the rules on Netflix because they decentralized the entire command, and there's no policy for vacations. There's no policies for vouchers. Basically, you are empowered with good talent density if you have great people on board to make all the decisions. Granted, make a few wrong decisions that hurt the company and we might be looking for another job, but they really, really decentralize that command and empower people. So I think it's, if you're looking for a huge company, given that example of exactly what you're talking about, that's one of them. And I'm sure you have a million more. Anyway,
well,
I
I
digress
think
again.
it's what you're describing is what's called it's called ROW, a results-oriented work environment, where people they're brought in. But it also means that you have to have the right kind of conditions and conversations. Like you're saying that they're throwing out some of those traditional rules. Some of the traditional rules that most people don't know are so default set in them are the extrinsic motivators that we're raising our families with and we're raising our kids in school with. And then it translates into the community and into the workplace. So right. Some of those rules are command and control. So it's the decentralizing, but it's also the use of incentives and bonuses. Those kinds of things, dangling carrots. Right. Or when people use a lot of, you got to please me, like I'm proud of you or I'm disappointed in you. And also doing too much for people, not giving them the wheel. So I know that example with Netflix is one in which when people feel that they understand the purpose of the organization and they understand the purpose of their own roles and they have choices in that and they have the support for their job skills and they have all the intrinsic motivation that they need to be high performers. So when Best Buy was years ago, Best Buy did a results-oriented work environment experiment, and they took a whole group of people and they just told them, here's the outcomes we want, you guys figure out how you're going to do it. And right. I think they took every Thursday off and went golfing and all that kind of stuff. And they produced at a much higher rate than when they were in a conventional model. So yeah. I do think that there's a caution there of making sure people are equipped to transform from the old system because it's embedded inside of them.
Right.
They don't automatically just know how to do that well.
Right.
And so I think that's probably that combination of knowing how to create the right conditions and conversations so that people can trust their power. Most people do not trust their power because their power has been micromanaged. Yeah. And punished and threatened and all of those things.
Yeah, which creates a fear environment, and people do not innovate in a fear environment. And the only thing that gets us through our challenges that we face in both personally and in companies and organizations is innovation, because every day is a new challenge. And if you're doing things the way things have always been done, then you are not moving forward. I suffer proud parent syndrome, as many people know, and I got a daughter who's a nurse, my son who's about to become a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, about to graduate the Naval Academy. And he spent the summer dealing with COVID and bringing new plebes into the Naval Academy. And it was a disaster. I mean, every company, every organization in the world faced, what do we do now? And as he was frustrated looking for a process and procedure, a standard operating procedure or an SOP, I reminded him, I said, there's no SOP for chaos. That's what innovation's about.
Yes. Yes. And if you have purpose in chaos, you can have what's called a K-ard, which is being able to take that chaos and focus it. It's not necessarily bad to have chaos if you have an intention for what you're going to do with it and what your outcomes are. Yes. So, or it's organized chaos, even though you're having to be, that's where your son is actually getting the message from you that he can handle being heuristic, being in uncharted territory and being able to create on the fly, because that's the way the world is moving right now. It's moving too quickly for us to look back at a manual and figure out what worked in the past, So,
absolutely.
So I hope that kind of answers the first half of your question. What is a healthy culture? It's a responsibility-based, purpose and value-based kind of organization where the goal is to mentor and empower people, not manage them, control them, motivate them. It sounds great to say, well, I'm a manager, I'm supposed to manage them. No, you're not. You're supposed to help them become self-managing. It's not that you're supposed to motivate them. It's that you help them remove the barriers to their own motivation. It's not that you're to judge them. It's to help them to assess themselves and grow into where they need to grow. And it's not for you to enable them. It's for them to discover how capable they actually are. So those are the things that build a healthy culture. But you also asked me, how does trust play into it?
Sure.
So in our world, we have this little house model. And in the rooms of the house, we have things like emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, self-management, awareness of the relationship dynamics, whether it's two people or a whole group, and how to manage those relationships. And it's things like personal responsibility. And what does that mean? And how does that show up? And how do you know if you're being personally responsible or not? And how do you have intrinsic motivation, which I just touched on a minute ago? And how do you distribute this kind of information to everyone? Because what traditionally happens in companies is that the titled leaders get all of that leadership development training, and it's almost thought as if it's impossible to train everyone or to mentor everyone. And that's about as crazy as saying we can't all have a cell phone. But it's almost like, the mentality, the mentality hasn't caught up. Yes, we can have everybody trained and have the same common language and tools. But the bottom of the house, the foundation, is trustworthiness. And what we mean by that is that we're asking people in the companies to commit to the notion that having a 10 relationship, when I'll tell you what that is, a 10 relationship with everyone in the company is the most important priority. And it sounds kind of nirvana, right? Like, how can you do that? First of all, 10 does not mean perfect. 10 does not mean best friends. 10 means that if I'm working with you on something, Robin, and I realize there's anything unresolved between us, we're not at a 10. It doesn't mean we have to go to lunch every day or, want to hang out or anything. It just means, am I good with him? Is there anything that I'm not saying or doing or working through? And so what happens for a lot of people is they operate in their lives not even paying attention to what that is. And they might even go from like, I had a 9 with somebody, now I have a 7 with them, now I have a 4 with them. And they will wait until the house is burning down to even acknowledge that they have a problem, sometimes even to just themselves. So in our world, what we teach people to do is to pay attention, and it's part of the mentoring process. So if I were mentoring you, I would say, Robin, do you have any relationships here in which you don't have a 10? And that is the beginning of your self-awareness. Let's say there's 2 people where you don't have a 10. Then you say, yeah, I think I have 2 people like that. I would not want you to tell me their name or tell me the story. I would say, okay, I'm going to write down that you have 2 of them. What number would you give the first one? Which forces you to go in your head and say, is it a 9 or is it a 2? Because it starts to clarify to you how crisis is this situation, or is it really minimal?
And Judy, if you could, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You broke up a little bit when you described what makes a 10. Can you go over again what makes a 10 and what the component is?
A lot of people would say, oh, nothing's a 10. That's perfection. But in our world, 10 just means not having any unresolved issues.
Okay, there you go.
It doesn't even mean we have to like each other or be best friends. It just means I'm not ignoring something that is troublesome, even if it's minor. So most people are not making that a priority. They're not even asking themselves, am I at a 10 with everyone? Because it's a new behavior that needs to be conditioned in us. And so when you own that, that's a foundational requirement of the company, then it becomes part of the practice of the business to have conversations around it, not conversations that go into the story, but conversations just to raise the awareness.
Right.
So if you had 2 people and you said one of them's a 7 and one of them's a 4, I don't need to know anything more than that if I'm mentoring you. Then I might say, okay, here's the 8 behaviors that could be being violated or neglected right now. I want you to look through the list, and we actually give them the list. After a while, you just memorize them.
Sure.
And then
what are a few of those?
Yeah, so they're like being straightforward, which means saying what you expect and what you want straight to people.
And if I could stop you right there real quick, because I love this concept, and they talked about it in No Rules as well. And it's being transparent. And when you're being straightforward, if we could expand that, because I think a lot of people get afraid of being straightforward because they're afraid of being cruel. Because correct me if I'm wrong, there's a difference when you're being straightforward when we're talking about an event objectively, and then some people say, well, I'm just being honest, and they're actually being very egocentric when they're actually poking at you. Yes?
Absolutely. So first of all, straightforward is the hardest one. It's kind of like the top of the chain of knowing that you can handle yourself. Trust is really more about how we are with ourselves than we think of. We think it's, do I trust Robin? Do I trust Robin not to hurt me, etc. Mm-hmm. The real trust issue is, do I trust myself to know how to handle any kind of communication? And so straightforwardness is one of the hardest ones, because you do need to know the skills and the understandings that keep your straightforwardness intentional. Like I'll tell you a little side story. There was a woman who worked for one of my clients, and she was a very timid, very loving, very, doesn't like conflict. That was her temperament. And she worked for the CIO, who was the one bringing in the project, and was very, very lovely. And she also had to do work for the CFO, who was not involved in the culture change at this point. And he was very much lead by intimidation and proud of it. And so she was having an issue with him because he would tell her to come to a certain location to work with him, and then he wouldn't show up. And this happened repeatedly, and she was very conscientious, so it freaked her out. Like, oh my God, did I get the wrong location? Did I get the wrong date and time? What am I going to do? And so it was very frustrating. And she didn't know how to deal with it, because this, first of all, it's her authority figure. And second of all, she's terrified of it blowing up in her face. Sure. Or her hurting somebody.
Right.
So what she did was she learned this tool we teach called the frustration tool. It's like this. I don't like it when you do this, and you state the behavior. And that's straightforward. I don't like it when you, like, if let's say you were my brother and I said, Robin, I don't like it when you leave the toilet paper roll empty. Right.
Right.
And then the next part of it is, because what I most want is I want a relationship with you and the family where we got each other's back. I want to know that, everything is needed in the bathroom when I go in the bathroom. Like, that's the basic, this is what I desire with you. And then the third thing is asking for the behavior change. So what I want is, I want you to commit to changing the roll if it's empty or whatever. Are you willing? So she thought, oh, this would be great for me to use with this CFO. So she goes to him and she says, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I don't like it when you cancel meetings and you don't because what I want is, I want to feel really secure in doing the best possible job for you. And I want us to have really strong teamwork where we have great communication. So what I want is for you to text me or email me or call me if you change a meeting. Are you willing? Because she felt like this was a safe way for her to know that it wasn't going to go out of control. And she knew what she was doing, and she even practiced ahead of time.
Sure.
This is the kind of hilarious part. He says to her, lady, who the hell do you think you are? I pay your paycheck. You don't pay my paycheck. What do you mean saying all this to me? That's how he responded. Uh-huh. But she called me afterwards and she said, oh my gosh. And, she told me what happened. And I said, so if you weren't worried about what he did, how did you feel about your yard? We call it your yard. When you took care of your yard. She goes, well, honestly, I was pretty proud of myself. And I said, yeah. I said, why don't you just stay in your yard and appreciate that you had the courage and you used a tool that you didn't disrespect or hurt anybody. And she said, yeah, thank you. I'm going to do that. So about 4 months later, now this doesn't always happen, but about 4 months later, she calls me and she says, you know what? He keeps coming over this way because, she's in a department. And he says, what is this stuff you guys are doing over here? And she said, oh, we're just doing this culture change stuff with Lifework systems. And he says, well, we got a lot of gossip over in our area. And she's like, yeah, we used to have that kind of stuff too. She's just kind of low key in it. And, and she tells me he's never done that thing to her again, where he cancels a meeting, even though he was horrible to her, never apologized or anything. And then she heard him go into the CIO's office and say, what is this stuff you guys are doing over here? And what was happening was people were moving from his department to this department. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, oh my God, it's night and day over here.
Right.
And he knew that it was different, and he knew that it was better. So my point is that you can be straightforward, but if you don't have the tools and somebody to support you in practicing them and to support you even when the other person goes nuts, it is always a risk to be straightforward. I mean, she could have been fired, but probably wouldn't have been. I mean, how can you fire her over that? But it's terrifying for people to be straightforward in certain conditions. And so even I wrote an article one time called sometimes transparency can become a bloodbath. Like, you don't want to just encourage people to be transparent without any guardrails of any kind around emotional and social intelligence and psychological safety and those kinds of things. Because a lot of people haven't been given the skills to be straightforward and feel confident in it.
You hit a few things in there I want to really highlight. And that is, so I have a communication model for communicating with people, and she honored it. And so in my communication model, to make it about the other person, if you're going to be straightforward, is one, you have to seek thoughts and opinions of others instead of sharing your own, talk in terms of their priorities instead of your own, validate them without judging them and giving them choices. And the way you phrased it was, she put the behavior change that she's looking for in terms of one of his priorities, assumed priorities at least, of her performance. And so if he's looking for her to be a higher performer for him, this is behavior change she needs for it. So she honored that, but he still flipped out. So what happens is, so she basically flared up his insecurities, and you so articulately, stated and demonstrated that we all deal with bullies in the workplace from time to time. And this is another great example of when you can't change the behavior of a bully, the only other thing you're left with is, what can I do to affect the people around them? And when you mitigate the people around them and create that culture around them, the bully just has nothing else to work with, and kind of relating it to some real world stuff right now as well. I mean, literally that's what's going on with Ukraine and Putin. You're not going to change his behavior. The only thing people can really focus on is the behavior of the people around him, because a bully is a bully until the bully has nothing to feed off of.
Well, and even the Ukrainian people are showing up courageous and trustworthy within themselves. And even this woman, even though the outcome wasn't what she was hoping for with him, she felt better because she was training him how to treat her. Like, yes, even putting up with his behavior all those other times was training him that it was okay to do that to her.
Right.
And she has such a loving heart, which most people do. And they don't know that there's a safe or responsible way to be direct. What is usually necessary around the trust behaviors before straightforwardness becomes strong is some of the other trust behaviors. And those are things like having respect for one another. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when we have anything that's a disruption in a relationship, the first thing that goes is our opinion about someone, our holding them as, we call it, in the monster box, where they are no longer a person, they're just a pain in our side, and that is, it's a really tough one, because I remember this one story this guy told one time. He was on an airplane. He said, imagine you're on an airplane and you're in one of the Southwest airplanes and you get to pick your seat. And you're really excited because it looks like maybe the seat next to you won't get taken. And you've put your briefcase on it. You've got your little tray down so that you're discouraging anyone from wanting to go sit there, right? And then all of a sudden, at the very last minute, you think you're free and clear. And onto the plane comes this heavy set person, all sweaty, like he's been running the whole length of the airport. And you're like, oh, great, he's going to want that seat, right? And he says in that moment, is that a person or is that an object?
Right.
Because if you're thinking about how inconvenient it is to you, you have completely dehumanized that person. That's a person that just wants to get home just like you do. Right. And then he gave the example of, imagine it was a gorgeous woman that walked in and I immediately put up my tray and I immediately cleared the seat. And then he says, is she an object or is she a person? Exactly. And again, she's an object, and so that's what we teach about respect. Respect is not creating a transactional relationship with someone. And it's treating them as a unique, separate individual that deserves respect and deserves to be treated as important. And so those are that's just like one of the 8, but it's one of them that until you have that, you don't even have a desire to be straightforward in a constructive way.
Judy, again, boy, I want to dive on deep on all these, but I want to do a little bit more on this one too, because I want to get into a little bit, if you can, of the how you do that. Because one of the things when I took over the behavioral team, especially in law enforcement, people tend to think of the individual they have to interview or get a confession from as the subject of, or the target of the investigation. Those are two words that I personally outlawed because you are objectifying the human being that you're about to try to have a productive, trusting relationship with. Believe it or not, if you're trying to inspire someone to confess, if you're trying to inspire someone to spy on their own country, you're not going to do it by treating them as an object. It's got to be extremely personal, extremely humanizing. And so I just used language to help me. But what kind of things do you tell people to do, to not objectify someone?
Well, part of it, I think it's a brilliant question. I really appreciate it. A lot of people don't dive into the respect more deeply. And I appreciate having the conversation because
people pick up on this.
They do. It's absolutely a felt experience. And
Yes.
it's very much part of our self-management. It's the part of emotional intelligence that is the beginning is recognizing when you've dehumanized someone. Like that example on the plane is a great example of if you're not awake, you're going to just objectify somebody and you don't even realize you just objectified some innocent person on the airplane, right? Yes. And so part of it is understanding human nature. For example, most people are walking around feeling dehumanized because of their experiences, and they're actually feeling unworthy. So they're gonna feel the fact that you've got them in a monster box. So a pretty extreme example is the prison systems. In the prison systems, the rate of recidivism, which is repeat reincarceration, is anywhere between 60 and 70% nationwide. So that means a criminal not only gets convicted once, he gets convicted again and again.
Right.
And that's pretty serious. That's a pretty serious pattern with somebody. And what's kind of ironic is that's about the same as the disengagement levels in our country in workplace is 60 to 70%.
Wow.
So what they did, there was a group of people that went into a prison in Florida, and they remembered, because of Adlerian psychology, they remembered that the 4 core needs of all people are to feel empowered, to feel lovable, which is the same as likable, to feel connected, and to feel that there's contributions that they have to make. And so what they realize is that all behavior is coming from that, even the negative behavior. And by that, what I mean is, say somebody's in a gang and they go and kill somebody because it's a requirement to fit into the gang. Mm-hmm. They will override their conscience and their fear of imprisonment. That's what any criminal will do, is they'll override their conscience and their fear of imprisonment, unless they have a psychosis or a schizophrenia or something.
Right.
They'll do it because there's core needs that are not being met in a productive way. So a person might actually kill somebody just to find that sense of belonging and significance in a gang. And then they end up in prison. Well, when the people went into the prison in Florida and they said to the criminal, "You're no different than I am. We both want the same things. You want to feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing just like I do." So they consciously took them out of the monster box. And by the end of their program, so the next step was, so how can we help you get those met a different way? Like, they didn't make them wrong for wanting those things. They made them wrong for choosing how they were going to get them. Like, let's help you find a different way to get them. And so once they started to create their life around that from a different perspective, the recidivism rate went down to 4%.
Wow.
That's pretty remarkable. And we see that same sort of thing happen. People cannot respect one another if they're trained to be enemies to one another, to be afraid of one another, to have each other in a monster box. And one of the conscious ways that I help do that in the lives of others, but also in my own life, is focusing on purpose. Purpose is the way to be high vision and high purpose proactive. So if I'm tempted to see somebody and discard them in my mind, if there's a part of me that's trained to say, "Oh my gosh, am I helping that person love their life by what I'm thinking about them? Am I helping myself love my life? Because that's my mission, to create a world where people love their lives." I can measure against that and go, wait a minute, I got them in a monster box. They're not going to love that. I'm not going to love myself doing that to them. So that's an internal management. So respect is really one of those things that you have to learn how to internally manage yourself to choose to not dehumanize people. But we have a lot of role models in our lives, including our parents, that often said things about people that were very dehumanizing. Right. Whether it was a political difference, a racial difference, an age difference, a gender difference, we've heard, because people recklessly use their words to dehumanize one another. And so we have to consciously train ourselves out of it. I hope is that answering what you're asking?
Yeah, I love those 4 areas. And this is going back to my 4 pillars of communication. This is going deep diving on non-judgmental validation. This is seeking to understand the other person from their point of view without judging it. And that's where we make those connections. And so one more time, what are those 4 things people are looking for?
Yeah. So the first they're not in any order, but the first one I always think of is empowered. So that means having a voice. So you can see what's happening in our society right now, where people are fighting to have a voice. Yep. So it's being potent in your influence. It's being okay with your power, all of that. Mm-hmm. Lovable is not the same as being loved. This is a huge one for me personally, because I was deeply loved, but I did not feel lovable. Meaning my parents didn't really allow any of us, because that was probably just the era I was raised in. They didn't really have curiosity about how our minds worked, what we thought. It was more like, you're a blank screen and we're supposed to write on you. And let me tell you how wrong you are if you disagree with me. Like that was just the way of the world. And it still is. So when you do that to people, where your goal is to kind of kindly, my parents weren't mean, but it was constantly like, let me fix you, let me convert you, let me heal you, let me change you. Right. And that does not make a person feel very delightful in themselves. Right. So lovable to me is really crucially overlooked. You could be the most loving leader in the world, but if you don't know how to make people feel seen and heard, they will suffer and they will cost you. Yeah. So curiosity and compassion and openness and receptivity is all part of likable and lovable. Connected sounds like a no-brainer, but a lot of people don't feel connected. They don't feel invited. They don't feel included. They don't even know how to do it. I had a friend call me that started a new job recently, and she said, I don't feel like anybody's very welcoming. And I said, you're already in attack mode to them. You already have them in the monster box. I encourage you to say in your head, I love these people. I love this company. I love them. And she went in the next day and did that. And she said, oh my God, I had a completely different day. And they were very responsive, because it's a felt thing. So she was feeling disconnected. So what did she do? She started putting them in the monster box. Right. And as soon as she took them out of the monster box, connection started to happen in a very positive way. So that's going on all over the place, where people are in cliques and they're not connecting, and then they're feeling isolated, and then they get stuck in that. And then the fourth one that I talk about that is also kind of like lovable, where it's not as well known, is the need to give contributions, to make contributions. Yes. We're often robbing that of people by being so stuck in our own feelings of inferiority that we don't want to act like we ever need anything from anybody, which is robbing them. And also, we don't foster the joy of contributing when we pamper people and we enable them and we exempt them. And I remember one time I was working in school reform, and we were taking away the control models, the extrinsic motivators, and one of them was using rewards. And in this one school, they were big on we got to give the parents a steak dinner to get them to show up at the parent teacher meetings and, all these prizes and all this. And I told him, you need to stop doing that. And he got so mad at me. I remember him yelling at me down the hall. He was so mad. What are we supposed to do? How are we going to get them there? And I said, why don't you just invite them to do something? Call them up and have the teachers call them up and say, hey, when you come to the meeting tonight, will you bring a quote to open the meeting? And another one, will you bring a story of that success story about your student and be willing to share it tonight? And, will you bring a bottle of soda to another one? Do you see how people love it when you give them a chance to contribute, but we don't even know that? So we're constantly trying to buy them. And that's what the school was doing. They were trying to buy the parents to being there. And then they were wondering, well, why aren't they that motivated when they're there? That's such a great point of contribution. 2 quick examples of that. One, every single 12-step program there is out there that people are in recovery for, and whether it's alcohol, overeating, or just being a disgruntled bad person who puts people in monster boxes, is be of service. Your best way to fix yourself is to serve others. That's a huge one. And I remember after 9/11, I was in New York City during 9/11 for the FBI.
and working very closely. My building was 5 blocks away. And I remember so many people wanted to feel connected, and I felt an obligation to allow them to feel connected, whether it was they wanted to bring cookies or sandwiches that I could bring down to folks, or steel-toe boots for folks like me that were going out to the landfill every day, and I intuitively did this. And in hindsight, I never really made that connection until right now when you said it. Was I was allowing people to feel connected and that they could contribute, because psychologically, that's what people needed for healing, for moving forward.
You need it. And unfortunately, a lot of times we don't give them the opportunity until there's a crisis,
right?
Because we're just not, it's not on our radar. So a really good leader would be looking at, what is it in my environment that takes away from these 4 core needs? Like, what are the things that we're practicing? Like, for example, in my family, I learned an alternative to punishment and harshness and bribery and all the things people do when somebody misbehaves. Most people are like, well, what else is there? If you don't have punishment and harshness and bribery, I can't see anything else. But there are other ways to deal with all kinds of negative emotion. What's that?
What'd you do?
well, it's actually a pretty interesting system that we teach called redirecting negative behavior. And by negative behavior, we don't just mean conflict. We mean like people that are seeking undue attention, those people that are very annoying because they're constantly trying to get attention.
Right.
Or a person that almost knee-jerk goes into power struggle.
Right.
Or a person who is in a lot of pain and they don't know how to acknowledge it or release it, and they feel ashamed of it. So they're striking out because they believe that they should be rejected. So they're going to create the dynamics where they will be rejected.
Right.
And if you don't know that's going on, you're going to get all of these misbehaviors are going to get sucked into them if you don't understand what's actually occurring. And then there's another behavior where people are caught up in a belief that they're not capable. And so they have what's called learned inadequacy or assumed inadequacy. And then they get others to reinforce that they aren't capable. It's like a vicious cycle. And the same with the 5th one, which is my favorite one. It's generally unfairly high asset people that they do this. It's called the goal of significance. And that's when a person doesn't feel okay, because we all have moments where we don't. But we act pompous because our unconscious goal is to get invalidation, which sounds crazy.
Right.
But because we have that unconscious goal to be invalidated, we will act all smug and dismissive. And other people are like, who died and made her God,
Right.
And instead of knowing how to read that and redirect it, and it's a tremendous tool but what it also does is it brings up a lot of pain in people when we teach it, because they start realizing, oh my God, the way I grab onto punishment and rewarding and bribing and all that has been a big part of the whole problem. And they feel a lot of pain over the fact that they were contributing that because they never heard of this alternative. So in our family, I wanted to release everything that would diminish those empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And that was one of the big ones. How do we remove punishment and harshness from the family and still create firmness, high expectation, and right behavior? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people need those skills, but they've never even heard of them.
Right. So what'd you do? So when someone did something wrong in your house, what did you do?
Well, I'll give you an example of what a redirect would look like.
Uh-huh.
So that last one I called the goal of significance, where somebody acts superior and smug, because subconsciously they don't feel okay, and they really subconsciously want to be invalidated. So there was this husband and wife, and they had a $35 million company. And the husband had approached me because their HR manager heard us talk and said, oh my God, we need you so bad. And he says, but how about we just don't tell my wife? Because his wife was this very outspoken Jewish woman who was like very in control of the company. And he didn't want her even to know that he wanted to bring in culture change. I'm like, I don't function that way. Like, there's no going around your wife. We got to work with your wife if we're going to make this work. So we had a meeting, and during the meeting, first of all, they were a very accomplished company. They had gotten to $35 million. They had helped a ton of people. They had won a lot of awards. They really were an incredible company in what they did. But during the meeting, it was really evident that she was in the goal of significance because she was very dismissive to her husband. She was dismissive about her leaders, some of them who she treated very poorly. And I'm sitting there going, really, God, I'm in a sales meeting and I've got to redirect somebody, because misbehavior shows up. You don't just pretend it's not there. Right. If you're going to walk the talk, you walk the talk.
Right.
So I'm seeing her in the goal of significance, and having had to do that a lot myself, because I had to, whatever we attract, we are working through our own healing.
Absolutely.
So I said to her, I said, hey, I just want to point out something to you. I said, you have done so much good. So the first step in the redirect for this goal is acknowledge their assets with sincerity. You have gotten all these awards. You've gotten to 35 million. You've helped this many veterans. You've really been amazing. And I just want you to know, I see that. And I said, but I also see that you want to go to 100 million. And I see a really big stumbling block in front of you right now that I could help you with if you let me. And I don't think you can see it. And it's really going to get in your way. And this is what she said. And this is what people will do. When you redirect them, they will get worse before they get better. So here I am validating her. And her deepest unconscious wants me to invalidate her. So of course she's going to whip out whatever can make me invalidate her if I wasn't aware. So this is what she says to me. Why do you think you can help me with anything? You don't have a big company like mine. You haven't done all the good stuff I've done.
Right.
I have so much stuff I could teach you. What makes you think you can help me? Like, that's how she went like on steroids with her superiority. And I said, and this is what you do. You mirror it back. You don't invalidate it. I said, you're absolutely right. You've come way further than I have. You've done way more than I have. I don't know if I'll ever get to your level. And there's a ton I could learn from you. And I would love to learn it from you. And this one thing that I'm seeing right here, right now, is in your way. And you don't know how to deal with it, or you would have. I'm sure you would have. Yep. So will you let me help you? And that's what the redirect looks like. If I had not known that, I would have gotten caught up in her nastiness to me, because it would have triggered my own inferiority feelings.
Yep.
And so this was an interesting outcome, which isn't typical. She said to me after I said that to her, she said, well, you have no idea what it was like growing up in my family. My father criticized me right and left all over the place. And my mother was a paragon of virtue. Nobody usually gives you the backstory. But that is what is behind that goal, is feeling like you got to prove yourself all the time. And I was able to say, well, thank you for sharing that. Wouldn't it be great if that didn't get in the way of your company going to the next level?
You became her greatest loving critic, which everyone needs in our lives. And you used the great skill of that non-judgmental validation. You did not argue context, which is critical to getting shields down and building that trust. And I love that example. Judy.
Well, the other part that's non-judgmental validation, but it was also the point at which you invite the person to stop being in competition with you and to be in partnership with you. And that's the piece that you can't just, because there was another person there just trying to do the validation part, and that wasn't going to take her to where she needed to go.
Absolutely.
So thanks for acknowledging that. And it is when you said you have your best ally or something, when you redirect somebody in that goal, but really all the goals, you create incredible people, because she could become the most productive person on the team if she took that energy that she's using to invalidate herself and used it to be in service. Absolutely. And that's really what you're doing. You're feeding two birds with one loaf of bread. Instead of hurting yourself and hurting the other person, you're helping everyone.
Absolutely. Judy, believe it or not, we have gone quite a while, and we've only brushed the surface of what we even planned on, because we went down this route that was so rich, and I love it to death. I think it's going to really equip people much better. Even this one little nugget out of the 8 that you can talk about is going to make a big difference. And I can't wait to get it out to folks. So this brings us to one. I want people to know you're extremely busy. You have a lot going on, but here's the special gift is that if you reach out for me at my email is robin@peopleformula.com. Again, robin@peopleformula.com. Yes, that's my personal email. And say that you're interested in having a chat with Judy and for your company and exploring things. I'll see what I can do to move you at the top of Judy's list and do an intro for you, because she is extremely busy, but that's one special thing we'll do. And with that, I also want to say thank you. And Judy, out of all things we've covered today, is there 2 things? Is there anything that you want to make sure we add in this chat? Because I guarantee you we're going to have more that we want to leave people with. And what's like 1 or 2 actions someone can start right now before they even dive into your content?
I would say, if I were to give a takeaway, it would be to write down empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And
Perfect.
then start looking at, even begin with yourself. When I look in the mirror in the morning, am I thinking and saying things to myself that make me feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing? Or am I looking at myself and going, oh man, it looks like I gained weight, or I got another wrinkle? Like really, it begins with us. And
Yes.
so that just even becoming familiar with those and trying to like line things up with those is very powerful. As far as getting in touch with me, I appreciate the link from them to you, because they know you and they trust you, and you know and trust me now, and I'm grateful for that. Other than that, people can use the links that you're going to supply on my LinkedIn profile or our
and
website.
There are tons. I can't wait to show it in the show notes. Judy provided me so much to give all to you, and I'm excited to put it out there. So yes, there's tons out there.
Thank you, Robin.
And thank you. And again, everyone, thanks for tuning into this intriguing episode of Forged by Trust. And again, our special guest, Judy. And we will see you all again on the next one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you will leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you are interested in more information about how to forge your own trust-building strategies, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. You can also follow me on my social media sites included in the show notes. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you soon.